The U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, which kicked off on the 13th of December 2022, has come to an end. The summit focused on the vital role of civil society and the strength of the African diaspora communities in the United States. It featured a range of sessions on topics from trade and investment to health and climate change to peace, security, governance to space cooperation. Speaking to African leaders, President Joe Biden said the United States is all in on Africa's future, and he announced new trade opportunities and infrastructure commitments, including for clean energy and the digital economy. President Biden also announced billions of dollars in support and investment for Africa at his summit with the continent's heads of state. The summit is seen as an American attempt to reassert its influence in Africa to counter Chinese involvement. Joining us on this show this morning, as we discuss the gains of this year's Summit for Africa, is Professor Ndubuisi Nwokoma, Director, Center for Economic Policy Analysis and Research at the University of Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome to the morning show, Professor Nwokoma. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, Prof, they say, well, you know that common saying that charity begins at home. Before we begin to talk about the U.S. African Leaders Summit, let's talk about this latest news, which we've just been discussing, about the latest inflation figures in Nigeria. Inflation figures now 21.4%, increase of 6.07% since November 2021. And the concern is, how come the CBN has not been able to rein in inflation despite all those monetary policies introduced? And now we have had to address money supply by redesigning the higher denomination Naira notes. What can anybody do about inflation in Nigeria? More so, as some economists are saying, where further tightening monetary policy may not help.
In my view, I think the Naira redesign actually contributed to this level of inflation in Nigeria. Because when the announcement to get the Naira redesigned came up, there was a serious pressure in the foreign exchange markets. And you discovered that those who hoarded Naira were actually now taking their Naira to buy dollars. And you see that the exchange rate actually deteriorated. The Naira lost value. From about 600 Naira to $1, it came up to about 700, 800, even approaching 900. So all those affected the prices that are linked to the exchange rate, other prices, because people talk about the exchange rate is increasing, particularly imported goods. You discovered that many of the items actually became more expensive. So the Naira redesign affected other prices, and that also made the inflation rate to actually get worse. So that can be linked to the actions of central bank, even though they tighten monetary policy and they increase the MPR, but the other policy that they carried that also helped to worsen the situation. So they need to be more cautious in their policy framework from going forward. If not, we keep on worsening inflation in Nigeria.
All right, thank you, Professor Nwokoma. So from your assertion, perhaps the monetary policy recently released by the Central Bank of Nigeria is counterproductive. In your view, what should the CBN be doing? What are some of your recommendations in your view? And then I'd like you to also speak to the what we just spoken about a few minutes ago around the authenticity or perhaps the genuinity of the figures that have been released by the NBS, going by what some experts have said as to the baskets being used, the parameters. What's your thoughts on that?
I think the central bank should be more cautious. That's the very first thing, because the policies that they brought out in October to get the Naira redesigned, that to me, did create some problems, and like I said earlier. Then this idea of cash withdrawal limits, also contentious and also controversial. So going forward, the CBN should be more careful, knowing that we are going into an election coming in the next 2-3 months, thereabouts, 2 months by February. And when you begin to churn out policies that actually are working against each other and try to tighten to make inflation worsen, because when you say you get the Naira redesigned so close to elections, even it has its own good side, there's a lot of hoarding of money outside the banking system, and that money found its way into the FX market. So they need to be more cautious. That is the advice I think I should give for the CBN to take. The other one is that there are other indicators that show that government needs to be careful. At the fiscal side, federal government actually has not been disciplined in that area. Expenditures that are not necessary are being carried out by the federal government. Increase in ways and means advances. So all these ones help to worsen the level of inflation in Nigeria. So CBN has a very key role to play. Even though they keep on tightening the rates, keep on increasing the rates, tightening monetary, cash and all that, making credit difficult to get. But other policy framework should not be counterproductive, or else we'll just be bringing out policies that actually are working against each other. So there's need for government, for CBN to revisit the last two policies and make sure that they don't worsen the macroeconomic indicators as they currently stand.
Okay, so what would you rather the CBN does to be able to fight inflation? They've made the argument that they've thrown in everything and it's not working. The reason why they redesigned Naira was because money velocity issues. It was not coming back, too much cash in the hands of people. They needed to call that in. At the same time, they are putting limits in to be able to curb that circulation of the currency. Also, one step further, they are pushing interest rates up, which a lot of people are doing in the world. They'll argue with you that even despite the fact inflation is coming down in America, the Fed is still raising interest rates. So what would you rather we do at a point in time like this?
Yes. I think CBN should have made more time available for these changing policies. For example, you want to get the Naira redesigned, you had the announcement in October, late October. And then by December 15th, you have a new Naira, some new notes coming up. I think the time was short. And that's the pressure, like I said, which affected other markets, was actually so devastating. So what I think CBN should do is caution. And secondly, some people have questioned the data being churned out by CBN or even by the MBS about what the rates are, about the level of money outside the banking system. There has been this kind of caution that CBN says that we have about 80% of the currency outside the banking system. People have said, is that really so? If it is so, why are the effects? Did they not properly take a look at the consequences of that policy? Because the consequence actually took everybody by surprise. Even the CBN itself, when you have a plan to get the Naira redesigned, and then the aftermath, it's so damaging to the economy. And that is why you can see inflation. So the data itself, people need to interrogate the data and also interrogate the speed at which you are implementing the policy. I think when you want to make such a policy that has such grave consequences, you need to take time and actually consult other stakeholders so that they can look at all the sides to the policy and its effects and see how we can try to minimize the negative effects on the economy. Because the ordinary man is now at the receiving end for all this. People cannot buy the goods the way the price they made the goods maybe yesterday. And you find that inflation is getting worse. And with the February elections coming up, I wonder whether we may have worse figures for inflation. Because the way we are going, bringing out policies in quick succession and each of them having some negative effects. I think CBN should be more cautious, should try to take a look at this data properly and make sure that what is being told to the public is actually what it is. And then try to let a policy simmer down before you now bring up another one. If not, you keep on working against yourself. That's my opinion on this issue. So we need to address inflation, but we do it with caution. CBN should be more cautious and minimize the speed in throwing out new policies.
Okay, Prof, having tried to address that matter about latest inflation figures in Nigeria, now let's talk about the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. There have been many views about it. Some people say this is a case of America trying to grab more space in Africa, given the fact that Japan has shown interest in Africa, France, China, as if this is the second scramble for Africa, a throwback to 1885. But what do you think in terms of the significance of the just concluded U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit? Do you think that summit had focused appropriately, as some people requested, on African interests rather than American interests? And will African leaders be able to get that African interest realized?
Yes, I think, in my opinion, it is largely in America's interest because they are all scrambling. America is trying to play catch-up. In February, the European Union has about a $171 billion investment plan for Africa. Now, the U.S. is now talking about $55 billion over 3 years for Africa. There are plans by China. Also, China has actually spent so much money in Africa. The African Union building in Ethiopia was built by China. China has assisted many African countries with so much credit. Zambia, Kenya, Nigeria, many countries actually have gone to China because China, does not really care about human rights issues. They care more about development. They don't care whether you are a dictator or whatever, which the West does. They care, put your house in order, human rights issues and all that, but China does not. So China has been able to gain so much inroads into Africa significantly. So what America is doing is trying to play catch-up. Particularly what happened in the last regime under Donald Trump, where Africa was actually, people say, insulted or bastardized. So Joe Biden is trying to play catch-up, trying to make sure that Africa is not left out. And also the vote at the UN concerning Ukraine and Russia, only about 10 African countries, or out of 54, voted in support of trying to sanction Russia. Only 10. Some of them abstained. Some of them voted against it. So there is fire on the mountain for America. They feel that they are losing out. China is actually investing all over the place. African countries are not very happy with America. And you can see, even in Nigeria, you can see the issue of visas were tightened for Nigerians going to America. Now it's been relaxed. If you have this drop box arrangement, it's now 48 months after expiration. So America is trying to play catch up. So all that, America says that it is being left out in the equation. China, the EU, they are taking positions. So in my opinion, what happened in the US, the summit, is basically trying to say, hey, we are still here. America is your friend. And they will see what we can do. Is playing catch-up. It's a scramble for Africa. And Africa should actually get the best out of all these proposals, but also be cautious that they all want you, not because they love you, but because they want to make sure they cover their flanks and they work in their best interest. That's my view on that.
Thank you for your response. And just as you ended that, in terms of who is favored of the two, U.S. and Africa, the U.S., of course, is what is out for their own interests more than Africa's interests, as it's obvious. Now, you mentioned also Africa leveraging this opportunity and also going with an agenda and also putting forward their own interests. I'd like to ask you, in what ways can we practically, as a continent, ensure that we come to the table as well with our own interest strategy so that we come out even making, coming out of such a summit more prosperous. And then talking about prosperity, following the end of the summit, the 3-day summit, it said that the U.S. has pledged $15 billion in trade deals, notably the $170 million for Power Africa and the likes. Some analysts have said that this isn't good enough. Bearing in mind this new, trying to court Africa, build stronger trade relationships with Africa and strengthening their powers. Do you think, in your view, what's your take on that? And then how else, or how much more, if you think it's not enough, should the U.S. be investing, and what areas?
Yes, thank you very much. If you take a look at Africa and at the key problems in Africa, one is poor governance, poor economic governance particularly. That is why you have this issue of unemployment. It's very critical. And many young persons are leaving the continent. They are going abroad because there are no jobs. So whatever help we can get to create jobs at home is very critical. Many young men are leaving. Some even go through Libya because there are no jobs. So whatever policy, whatever we can leverage on to bring in business, to create jobs within. But we cannot really create jobs if you have poor economic governance. And that's also good that Joe Biden met with about 6 countries in Africa that are going to have their elections very soon. Because if you don't get your politics right, you can't get your economics right. In every politics, there is economics. So for us to talk about creating jobs at home, we need to get our politics right, get the elections right, so that the person that can actually move our economies forward are those who are on board. So the issue of unemployment, whatever help we can get through attracting investments from the U.S., we need to try to leverage on that significantly, jobs. Then governance, like we said, the issue about making sure that we have sound macroeconomic policies. If you don't do that, we keep on going around in circles, and we don't help our youths who need a good future from their leaders. Trade in Africa is very, very important. What Africa needs is trade, not aid. And so the program put in place, the Prosper Africa program, of 2018, which was put together by the last regime before Joe Biden, we need to pursue that. The Africa Growth Opportunity Act, the AGOA program, need to be extended. The program will soon expire in the next 3 years. So we need to talk about trade, because what helps the continent is trade. Even in the area of aid, the American and other OECD countries have not been able to meet the target of 0.7% of GNI, of gross income. They've not been able to meet those targets. So the aid that we need from them is not even forthcoming. And the trend now is more on South-South cooperation, where you have emerging certain powers like Brazil, like China, which are coming up. And the West has felt threatened. So what Africa can do, one, leverage on the opportunities for trade, because trade helps you much more than aid. Secondly, whatever help in area of investment to reduce the level of unemployment is very, very critical. Then thirdly, to leverage on how we can have good elections, address the issue of economic governance, getting the right leaders to help you as a country, in the different countries, to make sure the economy is run properly. If we're able to work on these areas, governance, employment, and be able to address the issue, even health also, it will help us as a country to leverage. So any help from the U.S. in these areas will be very, very welcome.
But the problem has always been that because we don't have capacity on the African continent, trade is always skewed. The fact that out of the 15 billion that the White House said we signed in contracts recently, Africa and the US, most of the technical capacity are domiciled abroad, and the money still goes back to the American economy. What can we do to improve technical development right here that makes money come back to us? I'll give you an example. Most of the celebrated Nigerian tech companies we have today are all registered in Delaware in America. Because for you to be able to raise capital, you must show that you have a certain foothold in America. And you know what that means as regards implication for revenues that might have been gained. How do we increase that technical trust here?
Well, what we can do is to try, because the lender also always has the upper hand, or the one who's trying to ask has the upper hand. What we can do is to enhance our capacity in these areas. Capacity. We need to enhance capacity of our young persons to be able to provide skilled labor, so that whenever these investment programs or plans come in, we can get a piece of the action. And that is why I also welcome the proposal by President Joe Biden to make the AU a member of G20, or to push for it. Because if you're not at the table, you will not be able to discuss the core issues. You're either at the table or you are on the menu. Currently, Africa is on the menu. They discuss you, they eat, they discuss, everybody wants to take a part of Africa, China, but we need to be at the table. In line with the Monterrey Consensus, the key areas of the meeting held in Monterrey, in Mexico many years ago, the key areas, one of the areas of Monterrey is like, we need to address the systemic issues as regards to global development. And one of them is for you to be at the table. If you're not at the table, they give you whatever they want to give you, which they give you the jobs, they bring in the skilled labor, the money flows back to the country that is the donor countries. But if you are at the table, you cannot begin to have to negotiate on good terms. So that proposal by Joe Biden to push for Africa to be a member of the G20 is very, very important. Because if you don't do that, they give you the jobs, bring in their skilled labor, get the jobs, and the money flows back. Let us be at the table. Monterrey has about six key areas. The Monterrey Consensus. One is in the area of enhancing your domestic resources. Secondly, about trade, which is very critical. We discussed trade. The other one is about foreign capital inflows. Like we know the bulk of the money many African countries now live on, coming from remittances, FDIs, private investment coming from abroad. Then the issue of debt is very, very critical. Many countries now, like Nigeria, are getting into some serious debt crisis. These are areas that we need help in, which, if we are at the table, the other area is in the area of ODA. Like we said, many of the OECD countries don't meet up with their ODA targets, commitments. However, what we can push for is to remind President Joe Biden we should be at the table. The systemic issues about global development they should put Africa in the forefront. And if we are at the table, we will not be at the receiving end all the time. At least we'll have some little some gains in these areas. And that will be to everybody's benefit, particularly for the young Africans who don't see any hope in the continent. They're all migrating, even though they bring in money as remittances. But at least we need to create jobs within the continent to be able to help our development.
Okay, Prof. The Americans use this same summit to make statements about democracy in Africa. Number one, out of the 54 countries in Africa, they invited only about 49, excluded those countries where there have been coups or conflict in the last 1 year in the continent. Then President Biden, as you pointed out earlier on, met with 6 African leaders whose countries will be having elections next year, Nigeria inclusive. And of course, spokesperson to President Buhari, Garuba Shehu, has issued a statement in which he said President Biden reserved special praise for President Buhari for supporting democracy, for his performance in office, for not seeking a third term, and how he has made Nigeria a model for democracy. Do you think that praise is deserved?
Well, neither here nor there, in my opinion. Neither here nor there, because in some respects, you can say that for some state elections that has been conducted in recent times, there's been little interference by the federal authorities. And but there are still gaps. There are still gaps. Many persons that can vote will not be able to vote. I don't see any reason why your national ID card cannot be enough for you to vote. There are areas, there are still so many gaps that democracy is not thriving as we would expect it to thrive in Nigeria. And President Buhari can still do a lot more, to have a lasting legacy for himself. That there should be no interference in the forthcoming elections. There should be no effort to remove the beavers. Because some people have been clamoring for that. Let us do it the old way, because either they feel threatened that they will not win or whatever. There should be no, he should not budge. He should make sure that whoever wins is allowed to take office. He has done a little. He can do a lot more. So I don't think the praise is. I will support the total praise as being stated by Garba Shehu, but I think we can give him some credit for some local elections, some measure of, like Anambra, for example, like Oshun, where the opposition have actually won power. So I think we can give him some credit. But he can do a lot more. And the one that I think he should do, which everybody will forgive him of all his sins, is the forthcoming elections. If there's no interference, if they make sure those who can vote actually vote, they address the issue of security, people can go to the polling units and cast their votes without being killed. So if he can make sure that happens, I think all those other sins we've been talking about here that he committed, many people will want to forget, and he will leave behind for himself a very good legacy. So he has done a little. He can do a lot, much more than he has done.
Right, thank you. Still talking about the economy and looking at some of the outcomes of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. One of the things that President Biden had said in this conversation was to promote and support African nations in moving away from being primarily import-driven, especially with regards to the trade relationship between Africa and, in this case, Nigeria and the U.S., to being, to promoting more export on the sidelines of the AGOA, that's the African Growth and Opportunity Act. In what way do you think Nigeria can tap into this act and expand our exports, especially to diversify away from just oil to other, other commodities in the nation?
Yeah, thank you very much. For us to expand our exports, we need to address the issue of infrastructure, which is very, very critical, because what we export now are basically basic commodities: oil, raw cocoa, raw Africa generally, raw coffee, and all that. And for you to add value, you need to talk of investment in industrialization. For you to be able to offer a different set of commodities to the global economy, you can't expand your exports by just talking about it. You need to do something about investing in infrastructure. There's no power. There are no roads. There's no, a place like Lagos, there used to be water, pipe-borne water in Lagos about 20 years ago. They don't have that. Everybody has its own borehole. There's no security. So if you don't invest in that, how can the manufacturer produce? How can you now export to other countries? And then your goods will compete in price. So what America can do is to extend AGOA. AGOA will expire in the next 3 years. AGOA, which gives Africa preferential trade access to the American market. They need to extend AGOA for about 10 years or more, so that we can put our acts in order in the area of infrastructure to produce fabrics, textile industry, to others like aquatic cloth, adire and all that. We can export this, but we need to have market access, at least to the American market, so that we'll be able to sell, expand, extend AGOA. And then the program, Prosper Africa of Trade, we need to ask them to give us some more concessions in that area. While we are trying to address the issue of infrastructure here, we also ask for these kind of leverages from the US. Once that is done, we can now expand our exports. Unless it is done, we keep on talking about oil sector, because the bulk of the money we earn as foreign exchange comes from oil. We need to address these issues, ask for more concessions, and invest more in our infrastructure, and then we can export manufactured goods. Even if we don't even go to the US, we can even start from our neighbors. But the US is a very, very big market. Africa needs to actually exploit. So extend AGOA beyond the expiry date. It will help us as a continent.
But a lot of people argue that AGOA has been on for a while. We've not done anything with it. Is it overnight we want to fix all our problems? We all remember how Trump wanted to stop AGOA at a point before it was finally renewed. So even if you extend AGOA, does that solve our own internal problems of not being able to do what it is? Professor, as at 1898, 1899, the same way the French and the British used to take products out of Africa in raw form is still the way we are taking products out of Africa in 2022. No single add-on. Hence my initial question on technical capacity development. Another question I'd like to ask you about all of this, our partnership, is how are we going to back up with our own local capital? Because when you look at it, the Yorubas have a saying that it is the man that has money that has the business. Where is our own local capital to be able to provide these services here? We can't keep going cap in hand to beg. Where is our own local capital coming from?
Yes, thank you very much. Like I said earlier, the critical problem is about governance. I said earlier that also in every politics there is economics. And the reason why we are in this problem is like Nigeria has had this issue of a leadership challenge over the years. And unless we get that right, and that is why even in the summit, America knows that unless you have good elections where you have the right people imagined, these problems will keep on going around in circles. And with the next 10 years, we'll be saying the same thing we are saying today. Because we have those who come in, they just maintain the status quo. We don't develop capacity. We don't develop our infrastructure. We keep on, we just be business as usual. And that is why we keep on saying the same thing over the years. What, in my opinion, we should be thinking of is to focus a lot on getting our politics right. Very, very critical. Like people have said, and I share that view, that Africa's problem are basically leadership, primarily. Because if you don't get your economic governance right, we can't invest in infrastructure. Monies are diverted. We have the issues of corruption, which everybody is, we're all shouting about corruption. We have the issue of, we talk about inflation going on, because we don't get our policies right, we don't get the right people doing these jobs, we don't get the person who has the political will. So that is the way we go. How did Singapore develop? How did Malaysia develop? South Korea, they did invest in education capacity. It's leadership, primarily. From third world to first world, we can see examples in Asia. So it is not like we're going to reinvent the wheel. We can see what happened in Asia. How was Singapore? Singapore was crying when Malaysia had to send it out of the Federation. But look at Singapore today. Look at Malaysia. Look at the big difference. From third world, it's about leadership. So the idea of capacity, investment, what do we export? There has to be somebody who is visionary, a leader that can say this is where the country should be. Nigeria is operating below its potential because we don't get our politics right. And if we begin to operate by sentiments, operate by, oh, this is my brother, this is my turn, this is this, we will not get it right. We need to find out who can do this job. Make sure that we think of the next generation. Then all these other problems, they will be addressed. We have examples, like I mentioned. We have South Korea as an example. We have Hong Kong. We have Taiwan. We don't need to reinvent this wheel. Get our politics right. In my view, the issues we raise can be addressed.
Okay, Prof, we have just about 3 minutes to go. But before we go, we've been talking about the government-to-government side of it. But beyond that, there was also business-to-business, people-to-people interactions at that U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. What do you think of that in terms of value? Briefly, as we go. Well,
yes. I think there's also the need to engage the private sector. It's very, very critical. And I'm also aware that there have been this interaction amongst businessmen to make sure they're able to attract businesses to the continent, to be able to enhance what happens in the economy about job creation. So the commercial sector actually is very, very critical. Also, issue of culture, cultural relation, traveling, visas, and so on. These are very, very important. And once that happens, the ordinary man will be positively impacted. That's my view.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Nwokoma, for joining us on the Morning Show today.